We are live. College football week 1 is in the books. Ole Miss and Louisville was just the last game to finish, and we are set through week 1. Every single team has played, a couple teams have played twice, and we know a lot more than we did a week ago when we were just speculating after week 0 about most of these teams. So, if we have a quick scoreboard, last two nights, we had Notre Dame beat Florida State in the first FBS versus FBS overtime game of the year. The Fighting Irish emerged on a game-winning field goal in overtime, 41-38. And Ole Miss's offense really dominated Louisville and their defense too. Ole Miss shut out Louisville in the first half and entered halftime up 26 to nothing after that field goal. And it was really impressive effort by the Rebels. Lane Kiffin was not there due to COVID protocols. So the Rebels, they coached themselves and they did a great job of it tonight. So I was really impressed with them. That's a team that I think belongs in the top 25 right now. They have many great offensive weapons. Matt Corral is probably as good as any quarterback in the SEC. Impressed with Jerion Ely, Snoop Connor in the run game there. So Ole Miss has a really good thing going for them. But also, I'm very concerned about Louisville at the moment. They seemed in 2019 to make a lot of progress under Scott Satterfield, up from 2-10 the year before, but the Cardinals just have not been the same since. They were really a big disappointment in 2020, and now without Javion Hawkins, their offense really lost a lot of that degree of explosiveness, and the Cardinals seem to be headed toward another season of below 500. That was not inspiring football we saw from Louisville tonight. A couple garbage time touchdowns really propelled them to that 24-point output that they put. But every time I do one of these, I'm going to wear gear of a team that really impressed me throughout the week. I have a ton of different college shirts and hats. And I thought there'd be no better way to dedicate this week to quarterback McKenzie Milton. So I have the Florida State shirt on, the UCF hat on. It was also a good week for UCF, which we'll get to later. But Florida State, Notre Dame last night, I do think that the Seminoles would have had a great chance of winning if McKenzie Milton started the game. I do understand that a lot of Jordan Travis's early struggles were due to the offensive line, but McKenzie Milton did such a great job when he was put into the game. He completed his first 4 throws for 36 yards, finishing that drive with a touchdown. It was a remarkable effort for Milton, who most people, including his doctors, never thought would see the field again. He had that horrific knee injury in 2018 against South Florida on Black Friday. And the fact that he's on the field is remarkable, but he still looks like McKenzie Milton. He's still making some of those throws that he made at UCF, that quick release, the way he moves about the pocket. He still looks like McKenzie Milton. And that is probably the most impressive thing of all, is he gained all that movement back and he can still play football at that high level. So props to McKenzie Milton for giving us his presence back on the football field when we didn't think he'd get there again, and also for bringing Florida State back into that game. They were down 38-20, almost left for dead against Notre Dame. Leads them on 2 late scoring drives, gets that 1 touchdown to bring it within 3, and then they tie it with a field goal. And on that field goal drive, there was that 3rd down where it was a bad snap to McKenzie Milton, and he has the instincts to scoop that ball up and throw it away. All doing that with a knee brace on. I don't know how many quarterbacks would have been smart enough and have the instincts to pick that ball and throw it away. And he set up that field goal for Ryan Fitzgerald to tie it and send us into overtime. Although Fitzgerald wasn't able to make the field goal in overtime, which that was I'm going to defend Norvell on that decision to challenge the incomplete pass that Milton threw, because anytime you can subtract 13 yards off a kicker's field goal attempt, you're going to do it. So I don't have any issue with what Mike Norvell did on that challenge. I did think that the timeout for the challenge was called a little bit late because Fitzgerald already had that practice 50-yard field goal attempt. I have heard Jay Feely and some other kickers before state that they do like those practice attempts, but it always feels like you see a made practice attempt and then it misses the next try. I mean, there's so many instances of that in football, like when the Cowboys iced Dan Bailey against the Cardinals in 2011, or in the 2018 Birmingham Bowl when Memphis's kicker, I think it was Riley Patterson at the time, he made 2 field goals, but Memphis had penalties on both those plays, and then he missed the 3rd one that counted. So that's just something that I've noticed with kickers before, and it was a shame that he made the 50-yarder but couldn't make the 37-yarder. But Notre Dame's Jonathan Doerer gets the win. And There's a lot of takeaways from that game. I know that there was a high scoring result on the scoreboard, but I thought Florida State's defense was really impressive, especially with their pass rush in that game. They got some really good transfers, Jermaine Johnson being the notable one there, that really gave Notre Dame's offensive line some fits. Notre Dame's replacing some guys like Liam Eichenberg on that line, so the exteriors of that line didn't perform as well as I'd hoped for the Fighting Irish, and that might be a concern going later in the season. And right now, I'm eyeing that Notre Dame game against Cincinnati because Cincinnati has a really good pass rush, a really good defense, and I can't wait to see how they counter the Irish in that category. But overall, Florida State had 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and Notre Dame did some of the same to Florida State's line. There was really no good offensive line play there, but a lot of secondary play was a little shady too, and tackling the running backs. I mean, Florida State had Michael Mayer had 120 receiving yards, 9 receptions for the Irish, and he's as good as any tight end in the game. He's not going to be stopped very easily. And then for Notre Dame, it was stopping Jashawn Corbin, who I know he had that long 89-yard rush, but still he averaged 10 yards a carry, and Corbin was really producing a lot of that Florida State offense late in the game, and it was really good to see the Texas A&M transfer step up in that regard. Meanwhile, Notre Dame's rushing attack was not great at all. Kyron Williams, 18 carries, 42 yards, didn't have anything longer than 7 yards all night. I thought Florida State's front seven did a remarkable job, and Jermaine Johnson was really the one leading all that. And Florida State's defense gives me a lot of hope on what they can do later in the season. I think the Seminoles are going to be a lot better this year than last year, and that's mainly due to the defense. It's hard to gauge if this was more of Notre Dame performing below where it was last year or Florida State performing above where it was last year. We'll learn more about that in the next few weeks, but to put a wrap on that one, I still am confident that for now that Notre Dame's a top 10 team. I thought Jack Cohn was spectacular. I don't know if I ever saw him perform like that at Wisconsin with almost 400 passing yards, 4 interceptions. He was slinging that thing downfield. Notre Dame has a litany of receivers that were mossing Florida State defenders, beating them deep. And then Michael Mayer, what can you do? Mayer has been as good as any tight end in college football the last 2 seasons. Notre Dame has an ever-ending tight end factory. John Carlson, Troy Nicholas, Cole Kmet, and he's just the next one in that factory. So Michael Mayer is spectacular. And going to other games, the ones that you see on the scoreboard right now, UCLA over LSU. This was one that I kind of could see coming after UCLA played Hawaii on week 0. And I think UCLA having that one game of experience really put them in advantage in this one in the Rose Bowl. I know they don't have the biggest fan capacity and the biggest advantage from a fan standpoint, but I was really impressed with how UCLA handled this game. So the running attack, it's not really what I expected from the Chip Kelly offense at UCLA, but the rushing attack has been sensational. Zach Charbonnet, transfer from Michigan, has really found himself with the Bruins. Had 117 yards this week after scoring, 4 touchdowns against Hawaii. And then Britton Brown is just a bruiser in the backfield, and these running backs are really hard to bring down. And I think UCLA can create a solid offense off that. And DTR, the quarterback, had 3 passing touchdowns and found his target, Greg Dulcich. We talked about Michael Mayer a lot earlier. Greg Dulcich is also one of those tight ends that seems like a very pro-ready prospect. And he had 3 catches for 117 yards and a score in that one, so he was excellent. And LSU's offense was just a step behind. Keyshawn Butte was spectacular last year in the Ole Miss game, and it was nice to see him perform again. But LSU's offense just didn't click at the same level as UCLA, and it was an 11-point loss. And UCLA is going to be ranked this week. They're ranked in my poll. They're actually top 15 in my poll as one of the few 2-0 teams in the country. So I'm impressed with the Bruins, and I think they can really make a run in this wide-open Pac-12 this year. A Pac-12 which seems more open after Oregon struggled a bit against Fresno State. And if it wasn't for fortunate turnovers, the Ducks may not have come out on top of that. We'll get to that one later. Last game on the board right now, Georgia versus Clemson. There were 0 offensive touchdowns in this game, 1 defensive touchdown, a bad throw by DJ Uiagalelei, and a pick 6 by Christopher Smith for the Georgia Bulldogs. Bulldogs came out 10-3. A lot of struggle for Clemson offensively, and that really comes as a surprise to everyone because DJ was great in his 2 games last year. Had nearly 800 yards passing without an interception in those Boston College and Notre Dame games he started. And Clemson's offense, they didn't really miss a beat. It's a different style under Trevor Lawrence, but they didn't really miss a beat last year when DJ was starting quarterback for them. Now, the run game is a big issue that I see with Clemson in the post Travis Etienne era. And Clemson could not run the football at all. They only had 2 yards rushing. Lynn J. Dixon had 1 carry for 10 yards. I would have given him more carries. He was their leading rusher on the night. And I thought that Clemson should have focused more on establishing the run game because players that were not DJ Uiagalelei combined for 9 carries. And I don't think that's enough. I think that Clemson really needs to focus more on establishing that aspect of the offense because they were facing heavy blitzes. Uiagalelei was under duress the whole game. Georgia had 7 sacks as a team, and he had to get these passes off quick. Clemson's offensive line was getting destroyed, and he had a kind of a low completion percentage, and that one interception was costly. Clemson's defense was great. They didn't allow a single touchdown the entire game. I know Georgia crossed midfield and got into Clemson territory considerable number of times. James Skalski and this defense, they did what they had to do, and that performance will win Clemson most football games. I know a lot of people are concerned about Clemson, but I'm really not. They're asking where that marquee win's going to come on the schedule. If Clemson runs the table, they're in the college football playoff. They win the ACC. They're going to be in that playoff. I'm not concerned about them right now. I still have them top 5 because I think Georgia's a top 3 team in the country, and this game was just separated by 1 pick six. So I still think that Clemson's in good shape. It's not the result that they wanted to week 1. We've seen Clemson win these games in the past, beating Auburn in recent years, but this time it wasn't their season, so it wasn't great showing by the Tigers, and they were about as disappointing as anyone on week 1. Moving to some other games, starting from the right side of the screen, Texas, Louisiana. I'm really impressed by the Texas Longhorns. We have seen this team come out flat on numerous occasions before against Maryland and against Maryland again the following year. They still actually won a New Year's Six Bowl in 2018 when they lost to Maryland. But to see the Steve Sarkisian era start with a 20-point victory over a ranked team, it's hard not to be excited about the Longhorns right now. Last week I was on here talking with Joe Broback, and I was saying that I was not confident in the Longhorns with Hudson Card starting at quarterback because I thought that Casey Thompson was best suited for that role because we saw what Casey Thompson could do in the Alamo Bowl last year. But Card really didn't have any issues in this game, and he threw for 200-something yards and 2 touchdowns. But it's really Bijan Robinson that makes the Texas offense a really electric, dynamic offense. This was somebody who averaged over 8 yards a carry last year, and he had 100 yards in his 2021 debut. I expected nothing less from Bijan Robinson. Just no huge home run plays from Robinson, but it was just great run after great run, and he also plays a force in the receiving game, which is what makes him so special. 4 catches, 73 yards, and a touchdown in the 2021 opener. And then another former running back, he converted to wide receiver. Jordan Whittington seems to be their number 1 receiver this year. Joshua Moore held that role for the majority of last year, but I really liked the way I saw Whittington step up against the Louisiana defense, a really experienced Louisiana defense. And the fact that Texas really dominated them on both sides of the ball was impressive to me because I thought this Louisiana team might come up and give them kind of an ugly slugfest type of game like they gave Iowa State last year, like they gave like they gave Appalachian State last year, excuse me. But Texas wasn't really involved in that. Louisiana got that early field goal, and the Longhorns really had this game over by the third quarter, so I was impressed with Texas's effort in that one. Iowa versus Indiana. I've been trying to tell you all, Indiana is not a ranked team. They should not have been ranked to finish the 2020 season, even when they went 6-2. Their schedule did not check any boxes for me. The one winning record team that they beat in 2020 was a Wisconsin team that finished 4-3 and had tons of offensive issues. This was not the Wisconsin team of usual that could just pound it down people's throats with a great running back and great offensive line. This was a Wisconsin team that scored double digits on 3 occasions last year versus Northwestern, versus Indiana, and versus Iowa, and they could not get their offense going after their first 2 games. Now, Indiana lost to 4-5 Ole Miss in the Outback Bowl. Ole Miss did not have Elijah Moore that game. They did not have a lot of their receiving production. Still, Indiana lost to that Ole Miss team. I did not think that they deserved to be ranked in 2020 to finish the season. I think the best showing on their resume was a crazy backdoor cover against Ohio State where they finished within 7 points. And I did not think that Indiana, their performance last year, deserved to be ranked for preseason in 2021. Because think about it this way. Indiana got to number 11 in the AP poll last year after the first week of Big Ten play. On October 24th, they played Penn State, and they won on a controversial call. The call could have gone either way when Michael Penix dove for the end zone. I personally thought he was short, but the refs called it on the field as a successful 2-point conversion, and it was upheld. So Indiana wins that game, and they fly to number 11 because everyone thought Penn State was a national title contender last year. What does Penn State do the next 2 weeks? They go home, they get boat raced by Maryland, and then Iowa does more of the same to them. Why weren't Maryland and Iowa, who did not win on controversial calls, but established dominance from the beginning against Penn State and held it the entire way, why were they not given the same initial respect as Indiana? Oh, it's because we realized that Penn State wasn't as good as we thought they were going to be then. So Indiana, at that point, was just benefiting off of a misconception. And it seems like that misconception was carried all the way into the 2021 season. And they are not close to Iowa in caliber. Iowa was so much better than them last year. Iowa started rusty with 2 losses, finished with 6 straight wins, and they were really detonating opponents week after week. No surprise in Iowa City to see the Hawkeyes assert themselves on the defensive side of the ball the way they did. Riley Moss with a pair of interceptions, a pair of pick sixes. Riley Moss was tremendous for the Hawkeyes, and he's my defensive player of the week because of what he was able to do against this team. But Iowa, they're a top 10 team in my book right now. I'll show my rankings later, but I was not surprised by this result whatsoever. This is what I expected. Iowa being ranked below Indiana preseason was sort of disrespectful to what the Hawkeyes accomplished last year and a little oblivious to what Indiana wasn't actually in 2020. So it might be a rough season for the Hoosiers, and I'm confident that Iowa will be one of the top 3 teams in the Big Ten this year. I currently have them slated to go to the Rose Bowl and play USC in that game. Speaking of Rose Bowl, Pac-12 team gets to play in that game, and that Pac-12 team could very well be Oregon, but the Ducks did not have the best showing in the opening week. They did have an early advantage over Fresno State, up as much as 21-6. But Fresno State had a nice quick touchdown right before half, seconds before half. It was impressive that they got that drive complete. And then Fresno State, later in the game, Fresno State was able to execute offensively. They have a lot of good skill position players on this team. Ronnie Rivers, Jalen Cropper, Josh Kelly, Ty Jones. And quarterback Jake Haener looked comfortable for a lot of the game in finding these targets. Only problem this game was Fresno State had so many costly turnovers. And I think if they were able to limit just 1 or 2 of those turnovers, they'd probably beat Oregon because once Kayvon Thibodeau went out, they looked like they were the better team over the Ducks. And that's not a good sign for Oregon. They lost the turnover battle 3-1 by fumbling numerous times, and Oregon got lucky in this one. They trailed in the fourth quarter 24-21. They were able to tie it with a field goal. Anthony Brown had an impressive touchdown run for the victory. But this was not a good performance for Oregon to sell themselves as a playoff contender coming out of the gate, because I know a lot of people pegged them as that this season. I know they have a huge game against Ohio State next week, where Ohio State, they have a little bit of concern on defense, but I think that the Buckeyes' offensive firepower with their wide receivers, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, as well as their running game, I don't think C.J. Stroud and the Buckeyes are going to have too much trouble against this Ducks team, especially if Kayvon Thibodeau doesn't play. That is a huge X factor in this game. He's the best player in the country. He changes how offensive lines have to operate, kind of just like Aaron Donald does at the NFL level. So no Thibodeau probably means no Ducks win in this one. So if he's hurt, this game's going to be a little less hyped than I would have initially been with it. But Oregon still has some things to figure out. I thought Jake Haener was the best quarterback on the field on Saturday. So Anthony Brown did have that late touchdown run, which helped them get the win. And I do think that Oregon does have a myriad of great skill position players, C.J. Verdell and Travis Dye in the backfield, Johnny Johnson and Michael Pittman at the receivers, that the Ducks should be fine, and I still have them as Pac-12 champions, Pac-12 runner-ups later this year. I have them in the Pac-12 championship game, I should have clarified. Now moving on to the last game on the screen, Oklahoma versus Tulane. This was a game that was really exciting in the very beginning when Tulane was up 7-0 and then up again 14-7. And then in the second quarter, the game just felt like it was over. Oklahoma scores 23 unanswered points in the quarter, and everyone turns to Penn State, Wisconsin to watch more exciting, I guess you can call that exciting, at least closer action than the Tulane game had. But Tulane was so resilient in the second half. And they had those 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. They also had one in the third quarter. So they outscored Oklahoma in the second half 21-3. 3 points in the second half for Oklahoma. That is crazy good defensive performance by Tulane. And Michael Pratt, I've been hyping up Tulane as the team in the AAC that seems to be the dark horse team this year. And a lot of it is because of Michael Pratt. He accounted for more touchdowns than any true freshman last year. And the best thing about Michael Pratt, he's not a true freshman anymore. Comes out, has 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns in his 2021 debut. The rushing game doesn't do as well as I hoped it would. Pratt led the team in rushing. I thought Cameron Carroll and Tyjae Spears would be able to spearhead that rushing game a little more than they would, but Oklahoma's defense did a great job of that. You have to credit Nick Benito, Delaren Turner-Yell, just guys all across the field making plays. Isaiah Thomas on that Oklahoma defense. Tulane, I've always liked their linebacking core led by Nick Anderson, and I thought they did a very good job of staying composed in the second half when the lead got a little big, and that defense was the real reason that Oklahoma was not able to escape Norman with a comfortable victory. And then you have to remember that this game, due to Hurricane Ida, was moved from Yulman Stadium in New Orleans to Oklahoma. So Tulane was going to play this game at home, and you have to wonder if that home field advantage could have swung it a little bit. I know the Green Wave were fortunate to get that onside kick at the end. Then Michael Pratt on that 4th down attempt. Man, he was 1 yard short. It was a heroic effort by Pratt. Just wasn't able to get there, but Tulane, it's a great showing for the Green Wave. They're a team, one of the rare teams that shot up in my rankings due to a loss this week, and I think that they are the 3rd best team in their conference right now behind Cincinnati and UCF, 2 teams that I do believe belong in the top 25. So it was an incredible showing for Tulane, and I'm just really impressed with how far Willie Fritz has taken this team, because they were perennial losers before he got there. Then he comes in, takes them to a couple bowl wins. Now they're a team that appears in bowl games every year, and they're looking to take the next step. And this year, I believe that they have the personnel to take that next step. And Spencer Rattler in the game, he was pretty great other than the 2 interceptions, I would say. And it was nice to have Kennedy Brooks back on the Oklahoma offense. And Oklahoma's loaded offensively. Marvin Mims is going to be their star receiver this year. And just like I said, that I'm not too worried about Oregon having that close game against Fresno State. I'm not that worried about Oklahoma. I think just it's gotten so stale at this point, Oklahoma winning the Big 12 every season since 2015, that you just expect Oklahoma to figure things out. Even last year when things started even rockier for the Sooners with those losses to Kansas State and Iowa State, what did the Sooners do? They won every game for the rest of the season and destroyed Florida in the Cotton Bowl. Finished as a top 10 team in the country and arguably were one of the top 4 teams in the playoffs. If the playoffs started in January, I think they were a better team than Notre Dame at that point. And moving to the final slate of games, some of the earlier games, Penn State versus Wisconsin. This game was all defense. There was no offense in this game. Both quarterbacks had some brutal performances, Sean Clifford and Graham Mertz. But Penn State just made more plays than Wisconsin, and they made more plays defensively. They got two clutch interceptions late in the game. Jaquan Brisker had a really nice one that would have resulted in a Wisconsin touchdown if he did not grab it. And Wisconsin had the ball first and goal on the 1 yard line, down 16-10 in the final minutes. And they were unable to score. Bad snap, fumble with Graham Mertz. And then Penn State secondary really stepped up, made plays. And Penn State had several key stops near the goal line. There was one where they blocked the field goal early on, which would have been the only points in the first half. And that blocked field goal allowed this game to enter halftime at 0-0. And a lot of people were making jokes about this game being Cheez It Bowl level quality or whatever, but it was just two great defenses going up against each other, and the offenses of these teams just don't compare. So I thought both teams were a little disappointing last year, and I think you can attribute some of that to the COVID-19 season and the Big Ten starting its year in mid to late October. Penn State came out of the gate with 5 straight losses, finished 4-5. Wisconsin, on the contrary, they came out 2-0. They came out a little hot, but they were unable to stay consistent. Finished the year 4-3 with a Duke's Mayo Bowl win over Wake Forest. Penn State, they're not the same team they were last year. The defense is so much better, and this is an elite defense that I think is fighting at Clemson and Georgia levels right now. I'm impressed by them across the board. Ebikiti, their Temple transfer, looked great. Pass rushing from the defensive line. Jaquan Brisker is a star in the secondary, just a veteran safety that makes plays from there. And the cornerbacks, Tariq Castro-Fields and Joey Porter Jr., are probably as good as any cornerback duo in the Big Ten. So when you see a team like Ohio State and this week that's all offense, and their defense looks a little more porous than usual, and they're giving up touchdowns left and right to Minnesota, and then you contrast that with a Penn State team that's defense isn't giving up anything. And even when they're put in the worst spots due to field position, the defense is still making plays and finding ways to keep Wisconsin off the board. I am so excited for that Penn State-Ohio State matchup this year because there's teams of different styles, it seems, at this point. And I always love styles create matchups, and that should be a good one. Wisconsin, it's a tough team to read. I don't know if their offense is going to get back to where they were in 2019 when they had Jonathan Taylor. Graham Mertz was sensational in the 2020 opener. I've still wanted to find that magic from him since. I do think that Wisconsin has some good pieces on the offense. Jake Ferguson is a good tight end. They produce a lot of strong tight ends there. Danny Davis and Kendrick Pryor are solid wide receivers. It looks like Ches Malusi is going to be the feature back this year. Wisconsin usually has an All-American type running back, a guy like Melvin Gordon or Monty Ball or Jonathan Taylor, who, if Jonathan Taylor stayed an extra year, would have been college football's all-time leading rusher, passing Wisconsin's own Ron Dane. Malusi did have 100 yards, averaged around 4 yards a carry, but he wasn't picking up yardage in big chunks, really, and Penn State's defense, I thought, held Wisconsin's run game in check. On the contrary, Wisconsin's run defense held Penn State in check even to a more extreme point. Wisconsin was a top 5 run defense last year, and other than a 34-yard run by Noah Cain, Penn State had 16 total rushing yards on 17 carries if you eliminate Cain's 34-yard run. So Penn State really wasn't getting anything on the ground. And through the air, it was just Wisconsin was sending so many guys on a blitz, and Jahan Dotson and some of their receivers were getting wide open. I'm talking nobody within 10 yards of them. And Clifford was just chucking it up, and those receivers were there. And that was really the only source of Penn State's offense in this one. That led to their first touchdown, Jahan Dotson getting a wide open catch. They had a couple other of those in the game. And Penn State comes out with a 16-10 victory on the road, a real statement victory for a Penn State team that has been pretty stagnant from 2017 to 2019. A team that was looking to make the level to college football playoff contention, but fell just short. Had some brutally close losses to Ohio States and Michigan States over that span. And if this defense can perform at this level all year, Penn State's going to be up there. I just have questions about what their offense is going to bring to the table in the future. I think that they have good running backs. I like Noah Cain. I like Devin Ford. They got a Baylor transfer, John Lovett, that didn't play on Saturday. But I think that Penn State's running backs are going to be solid for the future. And I really like Jahan Dotson. So I think this is a team to watch this year. and they could contend for the Big Ten if Ohio State's defense does remain as porous as we saw them on week one. And staying in Big Ten action, here is a dark horse contender that nobody really saw coming. And that's the Michigan State Spartans. I could not have been more impressed by Michigan State in their opener against Northwestern. In fact, they impressed me more than any other team in the country on the opening week because Michigan State last year did not score 30 points in a game. Their offense was really dormant, and I was really concerned about where they'd head this year. Another year with Peyton Thorne at quarterback. Would he make any improvements? How would the running game look? And then they land Wake Forest transfer Kenneth Walker, who had a couple solid seasons at Wake Forest, had 13 touchdowns a year ago, two 579-yard seasons. And what does he do in his Michigan State Spartans debut? He runs all over Northwestern. 264 rushing yards, 11.5 yards per carry, and 4 touchdowns. Northwestern always has a good running defense under Pat Fitzgerald. I know it didn't look like that against Trey Sermon in the Ohio State game last year in the Big Ten Championship. Northwestern's run defense is so great, usually. And the fact that Kenneth Walker just put up NCAA 14 running back, 5-star recruit running back numbers on them is absurd. 264 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns. He's my MVP of week one, and he solved Michigan State's offensive issues. Michigan State finally has an offense again, and if they can execute like this in the run game, it's going to make me feel a lot more comfortable of what Peyton Thorne's going to achieve in the passing game. I thought he hit some good targets. He had mainly short throws, but finding his guys like Jaden Reed and Jalen Naylor, I thought that Michigan State was pretty efficient in the pass game. And Northwestern, I can't get a good grasp of this team right now. Hunter Johnson, who started at quarterback during their 2019 season when they struggled a lot, is back, but he looked so much better than he did in 2019. He had 275 yards, 3 touchdowns, all without an interception. Yeah, handling pressure really wasn't his forte in this one, but there was that one drive late in the game where Northwestern desperately needed a touchdown, and he went 11 for 11 and got a touchdown pass on that drive. So I was really impressed that Hunter Johnson was able to take the next step this year, but I needed to see more out of Northwestern in the running game, and especially on the defensive side of the ball. Northwestern has a safety that I think is a top 5 safety in the country, and Brandon Joseph. I voted him as an All-American last year, and you might remember him from his incredible interception in the Big Ten championship game right before halftime. But I need to see more out of their linebackers. They lost Gallagher and Patty Fisher, 2 of their star linebackers from a year ago, and allowing 264 yards to a single runner is not going to help them win too many games. I hope Pat Fitzgerald's team is ready to rebound. If you take a look at Northwestern's schedule, they play an FCS team next week, which should really help. And then they face a Duke team that really struggled against Charlotte on Friday night and surprisingly lost to the 49ers there. And then they face Ohio and Nebraska and Rutgers. So Northwestern has potential to win its next 5 games pretty easily. I know Rutgers looked a lot better than we've seen in past. I think this is the best Rutgers team since 2014, and you can quote me on that. Rutgers teams do not usually drop 61 points on an FBS opponent. They destroyed Temple. It wasn't even close. I think Noah Vedral, Bo Melton, and that offense have a good thing going for them, and I think that Rutgers is better than we've seen since they've joined the Big Ten. But anyway, off on that tangent, I do think that Northwestern's schedule shapes up for them pretty well in the next few weeks. It's a little more brutal to end the season when they have Iowa and Wisconsin in back-to-back weeks. While I don't think they'll repeat as Big Ten West champions just due to the lack of returning production, I do think that the Northwestern Wildcats do have enough to return to bowl season, maybe be a ranked team, and stay competitive this year. Other Friday night action, we had the early game of North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and man, what an unimpressive showing by North Carolina, a team that many thought was a dark horse playoff team this year. They qualified for the Orange Bowl last year. They have supposedly, you could say Sam Howell's the best quarterback in college football. And North Carolina looked lost offensively. Howell completed about half of his passes in that game. He had 3 interceptions. Some of them were tip drill interceptions by Virginia Tech. But I think the main concern with North Carolina is they had 2-star running backs last year. We saw them both get 200 yards from scrimmage against Miami. That's Javonte Williams, who's currently on the Denver Broncos, and Michael Carter, who is currently on the New York Jets. And their attempted replacement was Ty Chandler, a Tennessee transfer. Got 66 yards on 10 carries, which is decent. But North Carolina didn't commit too much to the run game, and playing from behind early just caused North Carolina to rely a little too much on Howell. I think Howell's best when his run game's complementing him at a high rate like it did all of last season. And he also is missing those running backs because they were great screen threats. Josh Downs is really his only target that he had any chemistry with, I thought, on North Carolina's opener. 123 yards and a touchdown between the two of them. North Carolina's only touchdown of the night. And you have to give credit to Virginia Tech's defense. I'm a big fan of Dax Hollifield, the inside linebacker there. Had half a sack, 4 tackles, leader of that defense. So I was really impressed with what Virginia Tech was able to bring defensively in that game. And the Hokies really needed a statement win under Justin Fuente. He's been there since 2016, and it feels like Virginia Tech's been treading water for a lot of that time. Hasn't really broken out to what they were in the late 2000s under Frank Beamer. But that's a great opening win and a great atmosphere because Lane Stadium, that would be on bucket list stadium for me. To come out during the Enter Sandman, it seems like one of college football's premier atmospheres and venues to watch a game. And I would love to do that someday just because Virginia Tech fans always bring the energy. And that's a great environment to get a win in. And home field advantage is a lot more considerable in 2021 when there aren't COVID stadium restrictions. And we're going to touch on one more game on the Thursday night beforehand. UCF versus Boise State. I had the pleasure of being in attendance for this one. I attended 2 games this weekend. I went to UCF Boise State on Thursday night, and I went to Texas A&M and Kent State on Saturday night. That Kent State Texas A&M game was more of a blowout. Just touching on that one real quick, Kent State did have them within a touchdown at halftime, 10-3. Kent State, who averaged 50 points per game last year, surprisingly did not bring the firepower offensively. It was their defense, more specifically their secondary, that kept things close in the early going. Kent State did win the turnover battle. They had 4 interceptions, but they only had 1 touchdown on the night, and it was in the final minutes of the game with backup quarterback Colin Schlee in. And Kent State did miss 2 field goals at the very end, which leads to a very funny bad beat segment. But Kent State was not able to compete with Texas A&M, and Texas A&M is clearly a strong team again. They may not have Kellen Mond anymore. They replaced him with redshirt freshman quarterback Haynes King. King showed some flashes of potential in that one, especially on this scramble that I tweeted out where he looked like Johnny Football. But he did have a few interceptions, but I think that the power of A&M skill position players, Anaya Smith, Isaiah Spiller, Devon Achane, should help Texas A&M regain their status from last season. So, Boise State UCF, final game I really want to dive into. UCF, they were down 21-0. In this game, the atmosphere was still great at the bounce house, but a lot of that was just destroyed by the fact that there was a 2-hour and 45-minute lightning delay, and we didn't know when these teams were going to take the field. And a flash of lightning would strike, and then the delay would pursue. It would continue, and it seemed like this game might just be canceled and moved to another day. Eventually, the lightning subsided, the teams took the field, and what was going to be a sellout and a completely packed bounce house did not have the same capacity as it would have had if the game kicked off at 7. Still, the energy was great, and the conditions they subsided a bit by then, and UCF came out flat. They actually didn't come out flat because they came up with a quick stop on Boise State right away, and they drove down the field with ease. Dylan Gabriel slides, I think, within the 5-yard line after a really good run. Their first and goal play is one of those triple option type plays where Dylan Gabriel rolls out to the side and he can run it. It looks like it's going to be a run from Dylan Gabriel. And then his receiver, Brandon Johnson, slips on the edge, and Gabriel finds an opening, but he doesn't throw the ball high enough, and it's not a good throw, and Tyreek LaBeouf from Boise State intercepts it. He has blockers in front of him, 100-yard pick six. Boise State's up 7-0. All momentum, all the energy in the bounce house just died at that moment. And Boise State was able to capitalize offensively. They had 2 more touchdowns, and Hank Bachmeier was getting throw after throw, just finding guys toward the edge, toward the sidelines. It felt like UCF's linebackers and defensive backs really didn't have good coverage abilities. They were leaving guys open. They were playing a little too deep in zone, and Boise State was getting open wide receivers every single time. I thought UCF did a good job containing the run game for the most part, but the passing game in the first half was a fatal flaw for UCF on defense. But then Dylan Gabriel and the offense finally found what they had established over the prior years under Josh Heupel. Gus Malzahn started running more tempo, quicker, seemingly scripted drives. They got one touchdown after Boise State went up 21-0, and then it was 24-7. And right before halftime, that's when the switch was flipped. UCF, with less than a minute, drives downfield. They have a long throw to Jalen Robinson. They get a touchdown on that drive. They enter halftime down 24-14 and get the ball to start the second half. They score on that drive, 24-21, and then a couple possessions later, they score again. Jalen Robinson gets a really nice catch on a perfectly placed ball by Dylan Gabriel to take that 28-24 lead. And UCF is in control. They expand their lead when Boise State oversnaps a punt over Joel Velasquez's head, and UCF gets a 30-24 lead. However, the Knights did not ice the game like it seemed like they were going to, because all the momentum was in their favor. Their offense seemed unstoppable at that point. They had multiple tries to really expand on that 30-24 lead. They were never able to do it, and Boise State eventually took the lead on another costly interception from Dylan Gabriel. Other than those two picks, Gabriel was Dylan Gabriel. He was fantastic. He throws a better deep ball than anyone in college football, and Jalen Robinson and Ryan O'Keefe are some perfect targets for that. So I think UCF's well-equipped offensively. But this second throw I thought was a little bit ambitious. It was a 1st and 10 after UCF just moved the chains. They really didn't need to throw there, especially with the production their running back Isaiah Bowser had. He had 170 rushing yards, and he was a great threat on the screen game too. Broke a lot of tackles, made a lot of good cuts upfield, and I was really impressed by the Northwestern transfer because UCF's offense, it seemed like it really needed a running back this year. I know they lost Bentavious Thompson, who's no longer with the team, RJ Harvey, who tore his ACL before the season. So having Bowser step up was huge for this program. And then Bowser scored the game-winning touchdown eventually after Boise State took the lead briefly, and UCF escaped with a 36-31 win. I just realized that the score is wrong on this screen, and I've been talking with the wrong score the entire time, but it is what it is. I'll go fix that. And there. UCF won 36-31, not Boise State, and I apologize for not noticing sooner. And to wrap things up, let's go with my top 25. I do rank all 130 teams, but we're only going to go with 25 tonight. Alabama's number 1. Alabama's number 1. I don't need an explanation for that. They really crushed Miami in neutral site action. Ohio State's number 2. I put them above Georgia. That one I really flip-flop between. It's a team that had defensive concerns versus a team that had offensive concerns. Georgia only had one touchdown, and it was a pick six. But they had a very high-caliber win over Clemson. You can't have Georgia and Clemson that far separated in the polls, in my opinion. If that game was just like Penn State, Wisconsin, just defenses dominating each other the entire game. Number 3, I have Georgia, as I said. Number 4, I still have Oklahoma. I think that Spencer Rattler in the Sooners offense is going to be great. Maybe that was the wake-up call they would need for later in the season. And I have full confidence in Lincoln Riley in this offense, which has plenty of good skill position players to execute. Defense looked great in the second quarter, and I think they have a lot of great pieces. I mentioned Nick Benito and Isaiah Thomas as guys on the edge, pass rushing earlier that I'm pretty confident in. And then Delaren Turner-Yell is their star safety that I think has potential to be an All-American this year, led the team in tackling in week 1. Oklahoma is in good shape. Clemson's number 5, as I mentioned. Texas A&M, we talked a little bit about the Aggies. They're number 6. I thought that was a great performance by a defense returning 9 of 11 starters. Have to give a shout out to Leon O'Neal, the strong safety. Had 2 interceptions. One of them he took 85 yards to the house. The other one, he stopped Kent State from tying it right before halftime. Leon O'Neal was the MVP of the game, and if I had a all week 1 team, he would be one of the starting safeties on it. Notre Dame's number 7. I still can't tell if that was more a result of Notre Dame is not as good as we thought they were, or Florida State is better than we thought they were. So we're going to have to see Notre Dame in future matchups to more have an idea of where they're at. Number 8, Cincinnati. Cincinnati's offense was better than I thought they'd be. They came out flat last year against Army and South Florida. They only scored 24 points and 28 points respectively in those games. Cincinnati's usually a team which dominates defensively, and they did that. They didn't allow a point in the first 3 quarters, but the fact that they scored on their first 3 offensive possessions and they left no doubt offensively made me really high on the Bearcats, even higher than I was entering the season. Desmond Ritter only threw 5 passes that weren't completions. He had 4 touchdown throws, matching a career high, almost 300 yards. Jerome Ford, the Alabama transfer, is now the star of the backfield, taking over for Jared Dokes. We saw some of what Ford could do on that 79-yard run in the Peach Bowl last year. I think Ford is built tough for this run that Cincinnati hopes to win the AAC. Iowa's number 9. I talked a little bit about Iowa earlier. Riley Moss returned 2 pick 6. I do like the makeup of this team. Spencer Petras has a pretty good arm at quarterback. Tyler Goodson is star running back, and then Iowa has a good tight end as usual in Sam Laporta. I think this Iowa offense is going to present a problem for this team, many teams, if their defense doesn't. And that is who I think is currently the second best team in the Big Ten. Number 10 is Texas. Texas is back, baby. Really good showing against Louisiana, 38-18 victory. Good start to the Sark era. Hudson Card, he had a good starting debut, and Bijan Robinson is going to take that team places this season. USC's number 11. I have not talked about USC yet in this show, but they beat San Jose State 30-7. San Jose State was the Mountain West champion last year, a team that was undefeated entering bowl season, and San Jose State seems to have really good balance with Nick Starkel at quarterback, a really good bruiser running back in Tyler Nevins, and threats on offensive and defensive side of the ball. They're a good physical team in the trenches, and USC was able to exploit a lot of that. And the Trojans had a very good performance, 30-7. I know San Jose State was close for a while, but USC eventually pulled out of that one with a 23-point victory. So I have them at number 11. I think they're better this year than they were in the prior year. Number 12 right now, I have Oregon. Talking about Oregon against Fresno State. Ducks escape without one, and if they win the turnover battle, they might not have escaped. This is more of a preseason assumption than a result I saw. I don't want to fall victim to doing that too much in my polls, but I do think that Oregon's a phenomenal team still. And if they lose to Ohio State next week, depending on how bad they lose, they will fall further. If they win, Oregon's a top 5 team probably in my book. So this could have been a scare against Fresno State, or it could be a sign of things to come. Not having Kayvon Thibodeau is of concern to me, though. Penn State, I talked a lot about Penn State in this one. That defense is spectacular. If they have a semblance of an offense, this team is a top 7 team in the country, and I really want to see more out of the running game this week. They play the reigning MAC champion Ball State. Ball State didn't look as good as we hoped in week 1, only a minor 31-21 win over Western Illinois of the FCS. So I think Penn State should be able to handle the Cardinals in this one. Number 14 is the biggest surprise this season, UCLA. UCLA dominated Hawaii 44-10 on week 1. Their defensive line just brutalized Hawaii's guys in the trenches. Dorian Thompson-Robinson's been a serviceable quarterback, but it's really the running backs, Britton Brown and Zach Charbonnet, which have led this team to a great offense under Chip Kelly, which we've been waiting for years to see this Chip Kelly UCLA team finally break out. And this is the Bruins' best team they've had since 2015 when Josh Rosen shined as a freshman. 16, I have Florida. Not too much on Florida. 35-21 win over FAU. Probably could have been better. It's another team that I don't know too much about where they belong at the moment. It's more of a preseason assumption with the Gators. I know they lost a lot of production, and losing Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts is certainly going to hurt this team, as well as guys on defense like Marco Wilson, who got drafted. Number 16, I have Virginia Tech. Impressive win over North Carolina. I'm assuming that North Carolina is still pretty good, but Virginia Tech, anytime that you can really derail that UNC offense like that, you deserve a ranking in my book. So I have the Hokies at 16. Wisconsin is 17. That should be my second highest team. That is 0-1 behind Clemson. Somebody had to lose the Wisconsin-Penn State game, and whoever lost that game, if it remained close, was going to remain ranked in my poll, and Wisconsin does. I still think that Wisconsin has a top 5, top 10 defense in the country. Jack Sanborn leading that inside linebacker unit. And they were excellent at pressuring Penn State and stopping their run game the entire afternoon. Number 18, I have UCF. UCF was the better team against Boise State. I thought that was pretty clear during that comeback. If it weren't for 2 costly interceptions, the Knights breezed to a victory in that one. Both of those seemed like they were 14-point swings. I think Gus Malzahn learned a lot in that game, and I think his defense is going to come out better ready to play, better prepared in the future. They have an FCS team this week, so expect UCF to rise after an easy 2-0 start. Coastal Carolina's next. They have Kansas on this Friday night. I probably will go live Friday night following those games, preview more of week 2. Coastal Carolina, they beat an FCS team. Grayson McCall did well. Not too much about the Chanticleers yet in this season. That is more of an assumption of what they were last year. Ole Miss had just played. Ole Miss beat Louisville. Very convincing offense. They came out of the gate and they really punched Louisville in the mouth on both sides. 0 points allowed in the first half was something that was really impressive in a game that defenders were exiting left and right due to targeting. So Ole Miss they're one of those dark horse SEC teams this year. I can't say contender because Alabama exists, but they're a team that I think could crash the New Year Six party if this offense can remain executing at a high level. Anytime you have a quarterback the caliber of Matt Corral, that helps. And I really like Braylon Sanders and some of his receiving threats that he used tonight. And they're loaded at running back. So many good rushers on that team. Ole Miss is my number 20 team in the country. Let's round this thing out. At 21, I have Michigan State. I think Michigan State deserved to be ranked after that performance. Beat Northwestern by 3 scores. Kenneth Walker solved their offensive issues. And I think that their defense showed enough for me to believe in the Spartans being ranked again. Number 22, I have Utah. Utah's a team. They trailed Weber. Is it Weber or Weber State? It's where Damian Lillard went to college. They're an FCS team. They came out early with a kick return touchdown up 7-3, but Utah really had control for the remainder of that contest. Have a transfer quarterback in Charlie Brewer this year, replacing last year's transfer quarterback Jake Bentley. And I think that the Utes should have enough firepower to be around the bottom of the top 25 for a while. Number 23, I have North Carolina, another 0-1 team in the books. Not sure about the Tar Heels yet, but right now I'm just assuming that was a really good win by Virginia Tech. We'll learn more about the Tar Heels later this season, but hey, their defense really showed up, and that was a lot better than their defensive performance against Virginia Tech last season, if you remember that shootout. Rounding it out, TCU. This is kind of a placeholder pick. TCU is just a team that dominated an FCS team in the opening week. I like a lot of the Horned Frogs returning production. Max Duggan is still their quarterback, very good zone read threat. And I think TCU's defense is going to be one of the best in the Big 12 this year. Gary Patterson usually exhibits great defenses on his teams. So I do like TCU at 24. And 25, I'm going to put NC State there. NC State is one of 2 teams, I believe. Yeah, Fresno State's the other one. Fresno State beat UConn 45-0 in week 0. So NC State was the only team in week 1 to get a shutout, also 45-0 over the South Florida Bulls. A shutout over an FBS team, I should clarify. And I think that NC State has a lot of great offensive talent. I like where Devin Leary has this program going. Ricky Person and Zonovan Knight, 2 good running backs that they have. And I like what they were able to do on defense, shutting out the Bulls. I know South Florida is not the greatest team at the moment, but NC State did what it had to do, and they deserve a top 25 ranking in my book. And that will be it for the night. Drop your questions, comments, anything you disagree with, agree with. And we'll be back talking college football week 2 preview, hopefully on Friday night. It was a pleasure